The Legend of Zelda is a franchise that has become widely recognizable around the world and is rightfully cemented as one of Nintendo's Big Five, spanning generations of installments as they not only break the mold of the action-adventure genre with every release, but also tell us an overarching story about legacy. One of these games that has come to receive mass appreciation in recent years is Twilight Princess, which was initially released for the GameCube in 2006 before being ported to Wii and receiving a remaster for Wii U later in its lifespan. This title has built up controversy just as quick as its popularity, however, as many argue a lack of identity when compared to the classic Ocarina of Time, particularly drawing ties to familiar narrative ideas. Regardless, countless fans have picked this game apart in their analysis to justify its qualities and display their appreciation, and that is exactly what I will be doing myself, as I have made a personal revelation to what I believe makes up a part of Twilight Princess's highly debated identity, an experience too surreal to match anything else that the IP has to offer. Psychological horror. The Legend of Zelda throughout the years has been no stranger to enticing trepidation into all forms of its audience, be it through skin-crawling atmosphere or enemies beyond our comprehension, but I believe that there is something more to the way that Twilight Princess utilizes these emotions, an approach that attacks players at their most vulnerable, mentally. I'm Mew-TubeHK, and these are the horrors and phobias of Twilight Princess. Many of Twilight Princess's aspects that contribute to this belief are due in part to the overall atmosphere the players presented, both from the perspective of the game's aesthetic and in-universe Hyrule itself. Let's start with the game first, as we can immediately see that this art style is nothing like anything we have seen in previous works. Unlike that which came before it, being the bright and cartoony Wind Waker, Twilight Princess fares a much more flushed and heavily detailed fashion, offering a stark contrast in both setting and tone almost instantly. While this decision was all but confirmed due in part to the backlash of Wind Waker not meeting the expectations set by the Space World 2000 demo, I believe that it also fulfills the role of serving as a testament to graphical advancements at the time, as video games around this era began to challenge the distinction between fiction and reality. This sense of realism is not only exemplified through the appearance of the living, breathing creatures that are present in Hyrule, but through their behavior as well. The beginning dialogue immediately introduces the player to a rather heavy mentality of Twilight bridging the gap between the living world and the souls of the departed. Unlike many other Legend of Zelda titles, this opening act does not dwell on any legends of the past or present a call to adventure, but rather invokes thought at a level that benefits from how we understand our own world and what we've experienced within it. This connection causes players to subconsciously adopt an understanding of familiarity, which also warns them that such a quest may prove to be personal. The land of Hyrule is apparent in this reflection of the real world, particularly through the emphasis on its community and its struggles in everyday life, an effort that I'm sure many can easily find relatable. The earliest glimpse of this is within Ordon Village, where its inhabitants are primarily concerned with guaranteeing a simple life for the next generation through hard work. This is contrasted by the inhabitants of Hyrule Castletown, displaying a higher class space and considering themselves better than those lesser than them through some examples. Once disaster strikes, these lifestyles are shattered, threatening the purpose of Ordon's labor and stripping away the luxuries of Hyrule Castletown. Even following these locations returning to their everyday lives, the impact of their grief is made evident due to lasting effects. Ordon Village lives in constant distress over their children, despite their confirmed safety in Kakariko, and the soldiers of Hyrule Castletown hesitate to raise their weapons in defense. This bleak ambience, complemented by a desaturated palette and an intrusive ugly yellow tint, almost paints Hyrule as if it were a dying, liminal space that desperately awaits a cure. That cure, of course, is you, the player character, braving the indifference at the source to exterminate that which plagues this world. The Twilight. To the average Legend of Zelda enjoyer, Hyrule is an ever-changing yet eternally familiar setting, retaining many of its recognizable landmarks throughout incarnations while sometimes introducing a wild card that centralizes around the game's primary gimmick. For games like Tears of the Kingdom, it's a complete one-to-one dark mirror of the surface world, while titles like Wind Waker take place completely above the flooded kingdom in a temporal limbo. In Twilight Princess, this gimmick is the Twilight Realm, an almost alien space that causes the land of Hyrule to become only inhabitable by those partial to this dimension, while those incapable transform into spirits and monsters. The reason I describe this area so is due to the generational turmoil that Hyrule undergoes in the battle of good versus evil, light versus darkness, and so on. An avid player may harbor a mental expectation of what to anticipate when braving the unknown corruption because of this reoccurring pattern. The Twilight Realm, while explained as a world stripped of light, is neither of these, and therefore falls in line with the game's central mentality of that which lies in between. This is the game's true unknown, an invasive force that strips us of our comfort and familiarity to manipulate it into a sense of unease and belonging, as if to say, we are not supposed to be here. Our encounters with the Twilight Realm are anything but pleasant, as Link's initial transformation into a wolf not only appears to be as unpleasant of a body horror transformation as those present in Majora's Mask, but also confiscates some of his equipment and capabilities, forcing the player into a scenario of vulnerability and demanding their senses to exhaust themselves by being on higher alert than what they've been used to up until this point. Our introduction to this domain is also greeted by the figure that forcefully drags us through the barrier, what I consider to be one of, if not the most horrifying creatures in this game. The Shadow Beast. The closest possible description I could give to these monsters is how their features resemble that of skinwalkers, an urban myth of bloodthirsty horrors that nearly resemble humans, yet are defined by their grossly elongated limbs. Every encounter with these things is nothing short of stressful and disquieting, often locking you within a small arena with multiples of them until they are all defeated in succession. Fail to leave one standing, and it will release a blood-curdling scream that revives those which have been slain. Their unique battle theme adds much to these situations, sporting an unorganized array of buzzing and scare chords to further reinstate the point that they are unnatural to a fantasy world even such as this. Finally, the later portions of the game introduce a moral dilemma to the player regarding the Shadow Beasts, as your expedition to the late Paths to Twilight reveals that they are merely normal Twilight inhabitants under the control of the main antagonist, raising the question as to whether it is alright for you to continue killing them, yet not entirely giving you the option to be merciful. One encounter in particular that continues to stress me out is during the instance where the Bridge of Eldin is destroyed, where they are instantly aware of your presence upon spawning and charge you from a distance, their ominous theme only kicking in once they're finally on top of you. Of course, the Twilight Realm would not have been introduced through this story were it not for the game's central villain, the Usurper King Zant. Zant is a curious character in that a majority of his screen time has his true identity hidden behind an unorthodox helmet and seemingly materializing completely on a whim. While a bit more of a specific comparison, I would argue that his behavior almost allows him to resemble that of Pyramid Head from Silent Hill 2, just not including the symbolic manifestation aspect. Because of this, he is wildly unpredictable and demands the audience's respect whenever he is present, even going so far as to include an accompanying scare chord at nearly every instance. Once his true colors are revealed towards the endgame, it's almost as if we meet a completely different character from before, as he transitions from a stone-faced overlord to an unhinged cultist for the true evil Ganondorf. His on-screen death is rather vulgar as well, practicing the previously mentioned body horror aspect by having him be outright popped like a balloon, which some may find a bit unserious from a visual perspective, but can be rather unbearable when considering how it must feel to be on the receiving end. Despite everything I've covered so far, the Twilight Realm isn't the only source of unease in Twilight Princess, as Hyrule itself houses many examples that can be considered off, at the very least. One glaring example of this that I've noticed is through the game's many dungeons, as the direction of their sound design and atmosphere comes off as noticeably minimal compared to previous locales in the series, suggesting what I believe to be a sense of emptiness and isolation. The Forest Temple is littered with incarnations of Skulltulas that could make even non-arachnophobes shiver, and has been analyzed multiple times over to be the supposed remains of the younger Great Deku Tree in Ocarina of Time, implying that the player is exploring the remains of an abandoned race, or perhaps a grand corpse. The Arbiter's grounds, infested with countless remnants of the past and ghost rats that are invisible to the naked eye, hints at many differing purposes before it fell into desolation, being described as a blood-soaked venue built to imprison Hyrule's worst and put them to death, be it through execution by death sword or at the hands of a beast per stalwart, and the architecture resembling a coliseum. Snow Peak ruins, while much cozier compared to others, are littered with traces of past inhabitants that were evidently lost to both time and nature, potentially generating a sense of fear of missing out, as well as accommodating one of the game's few jump scare attempts. The Temple of Time takes the Forest Temple a step further with the Armagoma boss, taking everything unnerving about the species and presenting it at a much larger scale. Finally, while the city in the sky may have been designed to be perceived on a much more heavenly plane, the off-putting existence of the Uku, as well as the repetitive music track being coupled with what's considered to be the longest dungeon in the game, can easily drive one into a vulnerable state of insanity. Hey all, future Mewtube here, so I'm gonna quickly break character in this narrative and mention that I completely forgot to leave out a little scrapped piece of the Armagoma fight as seen through previous E3 footage of the game. This never really made it into the full game, and I kinda just completely forgot to include it in my script, but I figured that I would share it here just to enlighten everybody that this fight could have been much more stress-inducing. Anyways, back to the video. You might be wondering about the few dungeons that I didn't include in this summary, to which I can answer that there is at least one that I intentionally left out so that I may discuss it in greater detail, as I believe it may be the most unsettling dungeon in Twilight Princess, almost unintentionally. I'm talking about the Lakebed Temple. The Lakebed Temple is the third dungeon visited by the player during their grand adventure, and its entrance is located within the deepest portion of Lake Hylia, a deep dive that I'm sure those with thalassophobia would likely not be comfortable with. The mere thought of how deep underneath this structure is from the surface of Hyrule is nauseating, and these depths are reflected through how heavily muffled its suffocating ambience is. To further this, while the Forest Temple and Goron mines before it may have included friendly monkeys to assist in traversing, and Goron elders that aid in crafting the boss key, there is no such help to be located within the Lakebed Temple. Aside from natural and hostile wildlife, you are entirely alone down here. The complexity of its gimmick doesn't help matters either, as one could easily find themselves lost if they end up making a mistake, unable to escape such a derelict institute. The only way out at that point would be to defeat the dungeon boss, whose approach requires you to go even deeper than the initial plunge. All of this wrapped together into a single dungeon makes for a rather nauseous challenge, regardless of whether fans appreciate or despise its design. To bring this analysis to a close, I want to turn our focus to a few other points of note that I wasn't entirely able to fit anywhere else into the video, these being specific interests throughout the story's progression. One aspect that I've come to notice throughout the game is its lack of subtlety in its important events. While many other forms of media may incorporate a simple transition such as a crossfade or a fade to white or black, Twilight Princess at times simply hard cuts, as if to completely strip us of our senses without any warning and generate an air of unawareness as to what may transpire next. Some particular cases of this that I can recall include locating the Ordon children while freeing Kakariko from the Twilight, witnessing Midna's anguish at the destruction of the Mirror of Twilight, and approaching Zant within the depths of his palace. Then there's the previously mentioned Ganondorf, who can be rather horrifying in both concept and presence in this incarnation. While viewed as an all-powerful cosmic being to the residents of the Twilight, particularly Zant, Ganondorf is actually killed twice in this game, defying the first instance of being brutally stabbed through the gut, before eventually meeting his end through what can only be implied as a broken neck, complete with uncomfortable bone-cracking sound effects. Finally, there's the iconic cutscene that many bring up when discussing the franchise's creepier aspects and Twilight Princess as a whole, the very moment that I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for me to bring up, the Birth of Hyrule cutscene. Countless YouTubers have already dissected this cutscene down to the very marrow, so I won't waste time going into very much detail on the meaning and symbolism behind it all, and will simply let the cutscene speak for itself. So with all of these horrific aspects in mind, one might ask if there's any merit to their inclusion, or if they are simply a byproduct of Twilight Princess as a whole. What importance, if any, do these examples hold? I'd be inclined to believe this approach was intentional, as it further elevates this game's lesson of what generates and drives courage. Colin's character development throughout the game displays to us Twilight Princess's personal lesson as to what defines courage, but the series' familiar theme of good versus evil isn't the only scenario that can beckon one to generate a sense of bravery. Evil may create hardships, but fear is much more effective at creating setbacks, preventing all of us from reaching our fullest potential and learning something new about both ourselves and the world around us. To brave the unknown and overcome such adversity is to nurture a heart of steel, and I believe that making the most of such an opportunity is what the game aids the player in accomplishing through this approach. That about caps off this short analysis. This was intended to come out much sooner last year, being generated as an idea from an October release, but ended up getting overshadowed by my completion of Xenoblade Chronicles X at the time, which you should totally go check out before Definitive Edition drops, link in the description below. If there are any instances that you feel applies to this discussion, I'd be more than interested to read about them in the comments below. Thank you all for watching, and I will talk to you all next time.